Cameras flashed like gunfire, relentless and blinding. The House Oversight Committee chamber pulsed with electricity. Shoulder-to-shoulder staffers, press lenses trained forward, a nation watching two figures seated in the eye of the storm. Jasmine Crockett, steady as steel with a flight log and deposition transcript in front of her, and Donald J. Trump, visibly sweating under the lights. Crockett didn't fidget. Her hands rested neatly on the evidence. Her gaze never broke. Across from her, Trump shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, hands twitching slightly. There were no crowds here, no chants, no social media filters, just the cold, clinical silence of accountability. The chair leaned into the mic. "Ms. Crockett, you may proceed." She spoke like a scalpel. "Let the record reflect the name of the minor mentioned here." A young assistant walked forward, white gloves on, carrying a sealed envelope. He placed it on the committee's table without a word. The DOJ seal stamped across it in bold ink. Trump's eyes darted to it. His throat moved. He adjusted his tie, then again, this time with shaky fingers. A bead of sweat slipped down his temple. He reached for the water glass. One sip. Another. And then, 7 minutes passed. No interruptions, no objections, just silence. Suddenly on live television, the unraveling began. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice barely audible. "It was a mistake. A setup. They made me go." The cameras didn't blink. They caught the tremble in his hands, the panic rising in his eyes. This wasn't a political hit job. This was something slower, heavier. A reckoning built on records, sealed testimonies, and words he once thought would never resurface. The subpoena landed like a thunderclap. 3 weeks before the hearing, Congress voted, narrowly but definitively, to compel Donald J. Trump to testify in a reopened House inquiry tied to the unsealed Epstein flight logs. For years, these records were whispered about, theorized over, but never fully weaponized. That changed when a 1997 manifest surfaced, one that listed DJT alongside Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and 3 unnamed minors. Trump's previous statements were already on shaky ground. He had long denied ever flying on Epstein's private jet. But Crockett's team had uncovered a different story, signed affidavits from a former pilot, a housekeeper, and a sealed deposition Epstein gave in 2009, all hinting that Trump wasn't just present, he was part of the inner circle. Jasmine Crockett read the log for the 5th time, fingers tracing the ink. DJT. The initials weren't ambiguous, the dates weren't easily dismissed. And the witness statements? Chilling. One girl said she remembered the tall man with the red tie who kept asking if I liked champagne. The evidence alone wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to crack open a door Trump had spent decades trying to weld shut. This wasn't hearsay. These were flight paths, receipts, signed names, and forgotten memories being resurrected under oath. Crockett didn't want a spectacle. She wanted the truth, on record, in daylight, in front of the American people. The subpoena wasn't just about accountability, it was bait, a legal trap disguised as due process. And Donald Trump, out of ego, arrogance, or both, walked straight into it. The interview was supposed to be damage control. 3 days before the hearing, Trump appeared on Sean Hannity's primetime show, seated beneath soft lighting and surrounded by loyal nods. He looked directly into the camera and declared, "I never flew on Epstein's plane, not once. Total fabrication. Another witch hunt." But behind closed doors, his legal team was spiraling. They had seen the subpoena, they had seen the manifest, and worse, they had seen the affidavits Crockett's office quietly submitted for review. One was from Maria Farmer, an Epstein survivor and former employee, who swore under penalty of perjury that Trump visited Epstein's New Mexico ranch in 2001. Another from a pilot described a loud New Yorker in a gold tie on a flight with Epstein and Ghislaine. Inside Trump Tower, panic was mounting. His team scrambled to assemble travel logs, trying to build an alibi, anything to discredit the date on the manifest. But every record they found raised more questions. There were gaps, days unaccounted for, trips logged as personal. Trump paced the hallway outside the legal suite, red tie loosened, cell phone clutched in his palm. "She's bluffing," he muttered to one aide. "That girl, Crockett, she doesn't have anything." But Crockett didn't bluff. She never had to. His advisors urged him to remain calm, to play he victim, to hammer the word hoax into every public appearance. But privately, they were terrified. Because if Crockett's documents matched the log, if the pilot testified, if even one of those Jane Doe statements could be tied to Trump's presence, the defense wasn't just weak, it was leaking from the inside. The hearing began with no ceremony. Crockett didn't clear her throat. She didn't waste a second on political posturing. The moment the gavel struck wood, she stood and held up a laminated document. "This," she said, voice unwavering, "is Donald J. Trump's 2019 sworn deposition, where he denied any knowledge of Epstein's activities or any association with underage girls connected to him." Then she lifted a second sheet, a printed quote from a 2002 magazine interview. "Epstein's a terrific guy," she read aloud, her tone sharp. "He likes beautiful women as much as I do, many of them on the younger side." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Trump stiffened in his seat, lips pursed. Crockett walked slowly toward the committee's table, then set down a photograph. Epstein's patio, 2001. A familiar figure stood in the background. Red tie, gold cufflinks, half-smile frozen mid-toast. "That suit," she said, pointing, "matches the one worn in a 2001 Mar-a-Lago press event. Same weekend, same man." Trump leaned forward, voice raised. "That's a doctored image. I've never—" The chair banged the gavel. "Mr. Trump, you will not interrupt the Congresswoman." Crockett didn't flinch. She turned to him calmly. "Mr. Trump, did you or did you not deny ever meeting Jane Doe number 3 in your 2019 testimony?" He didn't answer. His attorney whispered something, but the microphone didn't pick it up. She repeated the question, slower this time. "Do you deny knowing her?" The silence that followed was louder than any denial. Crockett wasn't just presenting contradictions. She was tightening a noose, word by word, fact by fact, and everyone in the room knew it. The room dimmed slightly as Crockett clicked her remote, projecting a scanned image onto the chamber screen. "Flight 733A, she began, September 1997, departed Teterboro, arrived St. Thomas, aircraft tail number N908JE, Epstein's private Boeing 727. She paused, then turned to the printed manifest on the screen. Passengers listed, Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, DJT, and 3 minors marked MF-15, MF-14, and MF-16. Trump's lawyer stood immediately. "Objection, DJT is not definitive." Crockett raised a brow. "Let's test that." She held up a notarized affidavit from a retired Air Force pilot. In his sworn statement, this pilot confirms. Donald J. Trump boarded the aircraft. He disembarked with Epstein and 2 unidentified young women. He referred to one as the blonde from Queens. Gasps echoed across the gallery. Trump's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, his face flushed deep red. Crockett wasn't done. She lifted another document, a printed email between Epstein and a brokerage firm dated 2 days after that flight. Quote, "DJT loved the island. Might want to come back in spring. G was thrilled." She didn't explain it. She didn't have to. The room felt colder now. The kind of cold that came with realizing this wasn't speculation. It was alignment. Evidence, timeline, testimony. All pointing in one direction. Trump shook his head faintly. "I wasn't there. I wasn't." But no one moved. No one blinked. Because in that moment, his denial felt smaller than the proof hanging in the air. And Jasmine Crockett, composed, deliberate, let the silence do her work. Crockett stepped to the side and nodded toward the screen. A grainy video clip began to play, deposition footage from 2015. The witness's voice was altered, her face blurred, but her words rang with clarity. "He told me to call him Don," the woman said. "He laughed when I told him I was 15, said, Jeff likes them young too." The room went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the speakers. Trump sat frozen, lips parted but saying nothing. His hand twitched on the desk. Crockett let the video finish. Then she faced him. "Do you recall that laughter, Mr. Trump?" No answer. His lawyer leaned in, whispered urgently, but Trump didn't move. The chair spoke. "Mr. Trump, you are under oath. The question stands." Crockett's voice sharpened just slightly. Do you want to amend your sworn 2019 testimony? Still nothing. She turned back to the committee. For the record, this deposition was entered into the federal civil case Jane Doe versus Epstein, filed in the Southern District of New York. This portion was sealed until last month. Trump finally moved, just his head shaking slightly, like the meaning hadn't yet landed or maybe had landed too hard. Outside, crowds watched on giant screens. Inside, the cameras zoomed in on his face. This wasn't accusation anymore. It was confrontation. Not about what might have happened, but what had already been said, and what couldn't be taken back. Crockett gathered her papers quietly. She didn't need to shout. The walls were already screaming. Trump slammed his hand against the table. I didn't know she was 15. The words hung there, suspended in disbelief. Some gasped. Others froze, eyes darting to the committee members, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak. Crockett stayed still, eyes locked on him. So you're saying it did happen? His lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, badgering the witness. The chair didn't flinch. Overruled. Mr. Trump is under oath. He may answer. Trump's mouth opened, but only a strangled sound came out. His voice dropped to a near whisper. They told me she was older. Jeff said it was fine. Silence exploded across the room. There was no rescuing that sentence. Crockett remained composed, her pen gliding silently across a yellow legal pad. Her expression didn't change, but the tremor in Trump's voice did not go unnoticed. The networks broadcasting live scrambled to adjust their headlines. Social media erupted, hashtags flying, clips already circulating. Legal analysts began dissecting his words in real time. And in the chamber, reality caught up with reputation. Trump had just admitted to being there. He had just shifted blame to Epstein. And in doing so, he'd confirmed the very thing he denied under oath. Outside the Capitol, crowds chanted louder. Inside, you could hear a pin drop. Crockett set her pen down and looked up slowly, not at Trump, but at the American people watching through the lens of history. She didn't have to say it aloud. He had just confessed. The defense team scrambled like a ship taking on water. Their entire argument, built on distance, denial, and discredit, had shattered in seconds. Trump's own words, broadcast live, were now evidence, not hearsay, not interpretation, confession. The next witness walked to the front, a former housekeeper at Mar-a-Lago, gray-haired, calm, and deliberate. She spoke under oath, her voice steady. Yes, Mr. Epstein visited often. Yes, he brought young girls. One called Mr. Trump Donnie. She wouldn't leave his side at the poos. Trump shook his head violently. Lies. She's lying. But the woman didn't waver. I remember her dress. It had stars on it. She said she was 15, said she wanted to be a model. The courtroom felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing inward. Trump's lawyer tried to interrupt, tried to bury the moment in legal jargon, but the chair allowed her to finish. Then came the footage. Old, shaky VHS from a 1992 party at Mar-a-Lago. Trump and Epstein laughing, pointing at young women dancing. One was barely 16. The clip matched the girl's own testimony from a civil suit filed years earlier. The visual confirmation cut deeper than any transcript. Trump looked away from the screen. His eyes found the floor. His breathing changed, shorter, uneven. Crockett didn't speak. She didn't need to. The pattern was clear. Denial. Exposed. Alibi. Erased. Witness. Confirmed. The foundation of his defense wasn't just cracking. It had collapsed, and the weight of every truth he buried was finally pushing him under. The silence after the tape played was unbearable. Even the media gallery, usually a rustle of whispers and camera clicks, sat frozen. Jasmine Crockett stood slowly, paper in one hand, and walked to the front of the chamber like she was carrying a verdict. This isn't about scandal, she said, voice low but resonant. This is about systemic protection. This is about who we allow to hide behind power. Trump didn't look up. Crockett held up a document. This is the 2011 civil settlement, a non-disclosure agreement. Signed, paid out in cash, traced through a shell company that dissolved 2 months later. And this, she lifted a second page, is the girl's diary, verified handwriting. She names him. Trump's attorney objected. Irrelevant, settlements don't imply guilt. But the chairwoman allowed it. Crockett stepped forward. She wrote, "He told me no one would believe me, said I'd ruin my life if I spoke up, that he'd ruin my family." Trump finally looked up. His eyes were rimmed red. In that moment, the bravado slipped. The posturing failed. What remained was a man cornered not by politics, but by truth. Then Crockett leaned in, so close the microphone caught every syllable. "She was 14 and you paid her to disappear." Gasps rippled through the chamber. One congressman dropped his pen. A reporter whispered, "Jesus." Trump said nothing. His lips moved, but nothing came out. 7 minutes of silence followed, not by force, but by gravity. The entire hearing seemed to collapse into itself, crushed by the weight of one line. She was 14, and you paid her to disappear. It wasn't just an accusation now. It was a scar opened live for the nation to see. The room remained suspended in tension. Trump leaned back in his chair, but the motion lacked its usual defiance. It was more like recoil, like he had been struck by something he couldn't parry. His legal team whispered urgently, but he didn't respond. His jaw twitched, his hands fidgeted, palms damp, fingertips pressing into one another like a man trying to hold himself together. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She let the silence work, let the weight of the room crush every ounce of plausible deniability. Finally, a low voice broke the stillness. Trump, barely audible, said, "They told me it was all taken care of." He blinked, realizing he'd said it out loud. A journalist's gasp rang out. Another leaned forward, typing frantically. The chairwoman raised an eyebrow, but did not interrupt. Trump's lawyer placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Trump, I advise you not to speak." But he did. "I didn't read what I signed, They told me she'd be safe, that I wouldn't hear from her again." Crockett's tone stayed even. "Did you ever ask who she was?" Trump hesitated. "They told me she was a liar, a grifter. I didn't want the mess. I had campaigns, things to protect." A collective murmur surged through the chamber. Even members of Trump's own party shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact with the cameras. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You didn't want the truth, you wanted silence." Trump swallowed hard. A flicker of something passed over his face. Guilt, shame, perhaps the slow unraveling of years spent thinking consequences were for other people. And outside on the Capitol steps, a crowd had begun to gather. Screens glowed. The broadcast was everywhere now. The fall had begun. Outside the Capitol, a storm of media swarmed the steps. Commentators spoke in hushed tones, no longer framing the hearing as partisan theater, but as historic collapse. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted from pressure to aftermath. Jasmine Crockett gathered her papers without a word. Her job was not to gloat. The weight of what had just unfolded demanded sobriety. Trump sat still. The lights no longer seemed to favor him. His tan looked faded under the fluorescence. He turned toward one of the committee members, someone once firmly in his camp, but was met with a cold, unreadable stare. Then, a sharp voice cut through the quiet. "We will now enter these records into the public transcript," the chairwoman announced. "Let the people see." Screens in the hearing room lit up. The sealed files were opened, flight logs, phone calls, unredacted statements, nothing hidden anymore. One entry, time-stamped from 2002, was especially damning, an itinerary showing Trump, Epstein, and a minor whose name had previously been protected. There was no spin left. Trump's lawyer tried one last maneuver, citing procedural overreach. But the chairwoman shook her head. The public's right to know outweighs your discomfort. In the hallway, reporters began broadcasting live. Anchors called it the political reckoning of the decade. Legal scholars began discussing criminal exposure. Back inside, Jasmine stood. She didn't look at Trump. She looked at the record. History always finds the liars, she said quietly, but it never forgets the girls they tried to erase. The gavel struck. The hearing was over. But outside, the reckoning was just beginning.